Good morning and welcome to the Forum at St. Bart's. My name is Peter Thompson. I serve as the vicar here, and it is my delight to welcome you to this discussion with Brother Curtis Almquist on the first Sunday in Lent. To introduce Brother Curtis, I'll hand it over to our rector, Bishop Dean Wolfe.
Well, this is a really fun honor for me. Brother Curtis and I have been colleagues for a long time, and we met when I was a vice rector at St. Michael and All Angels in Dallas, and I became familiar with the order when I was at Virginia Theological Seminary. Brother Curtis is an author. He's a former superior of the order, and he is, I think, one of the deepest and gentlest Christians I can think of. And so I'm delighted to have him here today talking about fasting in the modern age. So welcome, Brother Curtis.
Thank you, Bishop Wolfe. My joy to be with all of you friends at St. Bart's. Bishop Wolfe just named the word fasting. I suspect if I went outside of St. Bart's and asked the passers-by, when you hear the word fast, what do you think? And I suspect that what people are going to talk about is fast as an adverb. They're going to talk about how fast things were, the competitors in the Olympics, or about a fast internet connection, or how fast their sailboat or their new electric car is, which is not the context in which we heard the word fast at the Ash Wednesday liturgy. And interestingly enough, the etymology of the word fast, both in terms of speed, the adverb, and in terms of the verb to fast in some form of abstinence, it comes from the same etymological root. It's the sense is to hold fast to something, some kind of resolve. It's the way that we talk about a friend whom we may speak of as a steadfast friend, someone with whom we're in fast with. So it's a kind of discipline or kind of steadfastness with which we are in relationship to people or in relationship to life. Back in my school days, I was a competitive swimmer, and I remember our coaches were adamant on the kind of food that we may not eat during the swim season. We had to fast from certain foods. And the whole point was not to be living our life in abstinence as an end, but rather as a mean, because they were convinced that with certain things that we did not eat and certain things that we did eat, that we would be we'd be more resilient and we would be faster in the water. Fasting. So when we hear Jesus speak about fasting, we read of him in the Gospel of John, Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus says, when you fast. He doesn't say if you fast, but he says when you fast, presuming that fasting, and this is in terms of some kind of abstinence, is part and parcel of life. If we listen to Jesus in the Beatitudes, he talks about prayer and giving, that is the generosity of our hearts and giving in various ways, and fasting, all in the same breath, as if these are simply givens in terms of our practice of life. And what Jesus knew people needed was then how to fast. So he was not keen on what the Pharisees were doing. He said, not as the Pharisees do. The Pharisees, their practice was to show up in the market on Mondays and Thursdays with ashes on their faces, looking like they were fasting Mondays and Thursdays, because those are the market days, more attention. And Jesus says, not that. So Jesus gave certain principles around fasting as a means to a good. There's this old monastic principle around fasting from food. And the principle is if you are too full, you cannot pray. If you are bloated on something that is taking up an inordinate amount of space in your soul or in your tummy, you can't pray. Which makes me think of the Psalms, which repeatedly use metaphors around kind of a spacious longing. You know, we read in the Psalms about hungering and thirsting, panting after, desiring after God, which is coming from some kind of spaciousness inside of us. So we've not sated ourselves on something that will cause us to bloat, something which is less than the good that God has for us in this life. So what about fasting? I think there's more than one way to fast. And some of it involves food or drink. I'm just saying some of it involves food or drink, our fasting. In fasting from some kind of food or drink with kind of intentionality, we may be better able to get in touch with people whose lives are an unchosen fast, who are living in some form of poverty, not of their choosing. It is not a Lenten discipline. I'm thinking about many homeless people, or so many people who are living in poverty, elderly people who are hidden away in long-time care facilities, but largely forgotten. Thinking about people who are, I'm using fasting here both literally and metaphorically, in lands where they do not have access to food, to adequate food, or for the assurance of food, sub-Sahara regions of Africa, in places where there is now war, Ukraine, Syria, Colombia, Myanmar, people who are literally starving to death for food, and for many of them starving from love, hope, sense of belonging. And I think this may be true for you, it is true for me. There are certain people who live in what I'm calling an unchosen fast, who particularly touch my heart, who grab my heart's attention. And I think that there can be a grace if we choose to do some kind of intentional fasting from food or drink that will open up a kind of spaciousness, a kind of awareness, both in our bodies and in our souls, for those who, especially those who are living with the same, but they haven't chosen it. And this may prompt the opening of our hearts in our prayer. It may prompt the opening of our hands for help, for sharing of our financial resources, for people in our world, people who are nearby and people who are far away, a world which God so loves. You may know a great medieval saint, Saint Teresa of Avila, says, we're as good as God's got. You know, we're God's hands, we're God's love, we're God's face, we're God's heart to embrace this world which God so loves. We incarnate the God whom we worship. Having said that, fasting from food may not be an option, or may not be a desirable option for some of us. And that may be for psychological reasons, and fasting is likely to plunge us into a depression. It may be for physiological reasons. We may be taking certain medications or whatever else, and it's simply not an option. Or it may not be wise. Remember, some years ago, I decided that as one of my Lenten disciplines that I would give up coffee. And so we plunged into Lent, and about a week's into Lent, a couple of my brothers in the monastery came to me, and they said they wanted to talk to me about my Lenten discipline, about giving up coffee. And they asked me to reconsider my discipline. They said, would I please would I please take on coffee? They said, I'd be easier to live with in the morning. So got it. For whatever all reasons, for some of us, fasting from food or drink in certain ways is not a possibility or is not inviting. So how else could we connect with this principle around fasting, of creating some kind of space within our hearts, our souls, a kind of discipline to which we hold steadfastly because of a greater good that will come out of this. So I'm thinking here about fasting in a more metaphorical way. So what if you were to fast, do some fasting from words? I'm thinking, what if you would take on a more intentional practice in Lent of listening to those whom you love, listening to those whom you don't. Consider a 2-for-1 principle, you're listening to twice as much as you speak, So I'm thinking about fasting from words, your own words, the generation of your own words, so as to listen, so as to have space to open your hearts, open your ears to others. I think that when I've known conflict in various communities, this can even surface in the monastery. Sometimes the source of conflict has come out of a person's experience of not being listened to. It isn't that they didn't get their way. I mean, that's sometimes a principle. But when I felt hurt or disappointed in the outcome of some kind of decision making, it's more often not that I didn't get my way, but I wasn't listened to. So fasting from words may be meaningful for you. You might find it meaningful, helpful to fast from multitasking or from overactivity, or from whatever else consumes you, whatever else you gorge on, that bloats your awareness of being really present. We believe in Jesus, we take him at his word of being with us, being really present with us. But I would say we're only going to be able to experience the real presence of Christ if we are really present in life, if we are now, if we are where we are. If we're not, it's not to be living life being virtually present on lots of platforms at once, but to be where we are, which may invite the discipline of saying no, which is a troubled word for many of us. One of my wise mentors said to me some years back, I said yes too many times. They clearly understood. And they said, Curtis, until you learn to say no, you are really not free to say yes. And, I knew they were right. So this is fasting from too much, from doing too much, whatever your version is of that, so that you can be where you are, to be really present to life. Maybe it would be meaningful for you to fast from worrying or from regret or from revenge or from jealousy? Is there something that you find in your own practice of life that you get hooked on that is not, as the kids say, helpful to your program, that would be good for you to fast from? And rather than fixating on something which is life diminishing, both for you and for others, to fix on, to let that be a trigger, rather than to plunge into the depths of something which is not good, to embrace something that is good. So rather than there's someone who really pushes your button, to let this be an example of living into what Jesus is, bless and don't curse. So rather than tightening up, wanting to kill someone, pray blessing on them. People whom you can easily find their way on your cursed list are not going to be helped by your cursing them. That will not be helpful to them. Jesus is blessed. So I find it a really helpful discipline for people who I find real difficulty with. I pray for the best for them. I pray for God's blessing on them. Cursed people are not going to get better. So if there's someone who's on your bad list, pray for good things for them. So there may be a real help in fasting from negative consuming emotions that may trigger some way for you to address or redress life that is life-giving, both for you and for this other person. Fasting from worrying or regret, revenge, jealousy, or what? What's on your list? I mean, what's on your list that you could fast from? I already mentioned about fasting in terms of the pace of life, of living your life, if not slower, at least living your life more intentionally, of being where you are. One of the things I really love, a hobby, is photography, and I'm particularly taken with micro photography, of photographing something up very, very, very close. Flowers are wonderful. So are insects. But what's so amazing is there are things which are right in front of us at any given moment, which if we will slow down, not just blur through life, if we will slow down and be focused and attentive to what is there, we'll just be overwhelmed by the wonder of life. So it's looking on life more intently, amazing as it is. I would say, if you're not finding life amazing, if the word wonder or a synonym is not a part of your working vocabulary, you're missing something. Because I think amazing life, what is wonderful, is within your reach right now. Fasting. What if you were to fast from media? You're not going to go cold turkey, I bet. That's not going to happen. But could you do some fasting from media? The amount of time that you spend online, connected to a cable, on your iPhone. Could you intentionally do some fasting from that? I mean, we know the studies that are out there that this kind of being consumed with the media platforms is not helpful to our program. I mean, we know that the studies show this and how the deleterious effect it's taking on us. So what if you do some fasting from that? I'm just thinking, even try it a little bit, just some portion of the day. I mean, if you're into the media constantly, we'll start with 15 minutes. I mean, just start small and build from there. And you may find a kind of spaciousness that comes from steadfastly being attentive in the absence of the screen to something that is now, to what is around you or who is around you. So fasting from media in some way. You may find it helpful to do some fasting from some distraction or habit, some kind of indulgence that is eating you up in terms of time, in terms of energy, maybe in terms of shame, to fast from this. Maybe you find a connection with fasting about being steadfast in a kind of principled resolve around, I'll give you a lovely word here, kindness. That, let's say, try it during Lent, that every day you are going to intentionally offer one act of kindness to a stranger for the love of it. So it's a kind of a steadfast practice. It's principled. Some act of kindness, or maybe you can pull out the stops and do two. But I'm thinking here, not the people whom you already know and love, to whom you're just naturally kind, attentive, generous, but someone else. And you may be prompted because of a terrible look in someone's face, someone who somewhere or another you're aware of is in abject need, so as to give someone else cause to be able to be thankful for something in their day. So many people live without gratitude. So maybe you could take on a steadfast resolve around some kind of practice on life that would be life offering for you and life giving for someone else. A wonderful thing. When I use the word kindness, that's such a beautiful thing. The etymology of the word kindness and kin are related. They come from the same etymological root, kindness and kin. And the wonderful sense about that is we all belong to one another. We're kin to one another. So connect with someone whom you don't know, because we belong to one another. You might find it helpful to fast from your resistance of taking life on the terms that it's being given to you. I'm thinking that wonderful phrase in the Serenity Prayer about accepting serenity for things you cannot change. You might find it helpful when you find your stomach tightening or your fists grabbing one another, to say, rather than to resort to wherever you go with that, to say, oh, this is an invitation, especially if it's something which you cannot change. They take this as an invitation to pray your gratitude that you are not God, or your acknowledgement that you are not God, and to pray in the midst of what could cause you enormous pain, anguish, fight, to pray for the grace of contentment. Contentment is not a word in our vocabulary. I don't think it's not a very common word in American vocabulary. Contentment, it comes from the Latin contentus, which means being satisfied, which is presuming that what is now is more precious than what is next or what is new. What is now is what's most precious. So you say yes to life for what is now, whether you would have chosen it or not. If this is a deal, this is a deal. I have this personal mantra that I rehearse multiple times each day. And that is when I'm aware that something is not playing out the way I wanted it. And my mantra is, Curtis, this is your life. These are the terms. What's the invitation? This is your life. These are the terms. I mean, this is the deal. This is the deal. What's the invitation? And when I say invitation, it's to presume that God has extended our life
into this day, into as much as one more day. And we don't know if we're going to be alive tomorrow. We don't know if we're going to make it through the day. But it's to presume that God has given us life in this moment, and that this moment is full of meaning, that we can take Jesus at his word, that he's really with us, that his presence, his provision, his power is with us, if we will only be present to God's presence. It's to presume that now matters. So it's to say, don't cut in line, don't get ahead of yourself, as we say, but to be really present where you are, to presume these are the terms in which God is giving us life, to be where you are, and to be grateful on the terms in which God is giving you life. If and when you find yourself in spaces that are not of your choosing and which you cannot change. And if your life is anything like mine, that happens a fair amount. I mean, sometimes it's just waiting for the elevator. I mean, it doesn't have to be something huge. It can be something, these small things, the red light that's taking too long, whether it's big or small, to be where you are. I'm also thinking about fasting, fasting in terms of not getting ahead of yourself, not having this voracious appetite for what is more, what is next, what is new, of living into kind of a contentment with life on the terms it's being given, may invite your greater sensitivity, your greater openness to people's whose lives are perhaps much smaller than yours. I'm thinking about people who are in prison, who are living on the terms of life, which may be far, far, far smaller than what many of us know. Or people who are imprisoned in marriages that are killing one or both partners. Or people who are incarcerated because of abuse that they live with or live around, or because of addiction. So I'm just thinking to use the kind of invitation of being present in the confines of your life as a way of opening your own heart, your own mind to those who are living in confines that are not of their choosing. What does that prompt you? Some of you may find it meaningful to fast from some kind of practice or habit in life that requires energy, and I'm thinking carbon energy, in the face of the climate emergency. And so you do some kind of fasting from your mobility or from your expenditure of energy for an intentional reason. Now, what I'm not saying here is, if you do this, any of these kinds of fasting that may be meaningful for you, what will be the net result? What will happen? Well, I'm not sure. I've suggested some things that might happen, but you will know. You will know what this does for you. And I think that all of us will approach fasting in very different ways. If this can have a kind of meaningful practice for us. The metaphor in the scriptures is we're all members of one body, so we're all different parts of the body. St. Paul, Jesus speaking symbolically. So I think that how we're going to fast is going to be quite different one from another, which I would say is just fine. Which is just fine. So I want to give you this question about fasting. In this season of your life right now, this Lenten season, or this season where you find yourself, given your age, your location, your work, your whatever the terms are of your life, where could fasting more meaningfully enter into your life? Something salubrious for your soul to embrace, steadfastly embrace, or fasting in terms of something meaningful for you to give up, as it were. I'm thinking in both ways, both to embrace and to give up. So I'd like to pause here for just a few moments
in silence with you and see whether anything that I've named here or something else that may have come to your own heart's attention is meaningful for you or would be meaningful for you in terms of fasting. And then we'll come back. So friends, I'm wondering what you've gotten in touch with here. This may be something to spend some more time pondering and praying about, this fasting and the many forms it could take. So I want to just open up some dialogue. You can do some online questions you can send my direction. You can challenge me in something I've said, push back. Any kind of anything you'd like to send my way through the Zoom chat.
And I'll just add, if you do have questions or comments for Brother Curtis, you can insert them on the live chat on YouTube, the comments on Facebook, or you can email me, pthompson@stbarts.org. That's PTHOMPSON @STBARTS.org.
Thank you, Peter.
While those are coming in, I just, that the idea of fasting from worry, I have to say, is a very appealing. I'm not quite sure how one goes about it, but I have to grant that I overindulge in that. Could you say a word more about that?
Yes, Bishop Wolf. I suspect, thank you for being so transparent for us all. I suspect you're speaking on behalf of many about worry. I think it's revealing when we look at the New Testament, how many times we read about St. Paul, Jesus saying, don't be anxious, don't worry. And the context in which we read this is not, do not worry. It's not a scolding. It is more an invitation. The invitation is like being like a child that's frightened and is picked up by a parent or loved one and said, my love, don't worry, I'm here with you. And I think that's the context in which I think we can take Jesus at his word. I mean, there's endless things we can worry about in life. And I think that when we get in touch with worry or anxiety, I think for many of us, we realize that we're feeling powerless, where we're feeling so small in the face of something that is so large. And I think rather than to take this as an obstacle, we take it as an invitation and to say, this is what is going to keep us on our knees. My own sense is that God is not going to provide for us in such a way that we no longer need God. Yep. There's always going to be part of us that is helpless or feeling hapless, and that we take these moments that you've named, Bishop Wolf, that I think many of us can relate to as invitations.
Brother Curtis, I also had another thought. I'm thinking of all of the retreats that you've led, all of the spiritual direction you've done. You've really devoted a lifetime to the spiritual way. What do you think people just don't get about this way of this life, this path, this journey? Do you see something that you say, wow, that just keeps coming up over and over again? People just don't seem to get this.
Will you honor me with the question? Well, what comes to mind is, I hear constantly, but it can as easily be my own issue too. And that is that we can embrace the notion that God loves the world and God loves other people. But God doesn't love me. There's something about me. There's something in my past or in my present that is a disqualifier. And I would say, but I find myself saying to so many people, various versions of this, as I must remind myself who you are and what you are, where you are, how you are. Wherever it is you've gotten to be the way you are, God knows and God loves. God adores you. And I think that many of us need help knowing this and remembering this. I mean, God went to all lengths. I mean, God was born among us in the face and form of Jesus, so Jesus could take on our humanity, to convince us that this is so. So I would say that is the challenge that I hear constantly, and which I'm acquainted with on a bad day myself. God love me. And can God possibly love me because of blank and blank and blank? And the answer is absolutely. We do not have to change. We do not have to change in any way. We do not have to change in any way whatsoever for God to love us, for God to adore us. I think saying yes to that will change everything.
Yeah.
There's no qualifiers for God's love.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we're coming close to the end of our time together. We did have a few people write in with some of the fasts they are choosing or that they are drawn to this season. We also have a question from someone who asks if you might comment on the words we heard from Jesus just a few days ago, to not let others know that we are fasting, and how can that factor into our thoughts about fasting in this season?
Yeah. I mean, that's where Jesus was rather reproachful for showing off our spiritual disciplines and bragging about them both physically. I mean, that's where Jesus was so down on the Pharisees, or in some other kind of way that's ostentatious. Well, I would say that the point of fasting is what fasting opens up. However we may relate to this word, and I've named all kinds of ways, quite literally, biologically, but also kind of metaphorically. And I would say to let the grace that comes out of fasting flow, and not to use it as an occasion for bragging to others or to ourselves, but simply to let the kind of capaciousness that fasting may open up in our own souls, and how we navigate our way through the day, to allow us to be more present to life, to be really present. And depending on how we act on our fasting, whatever we're fasting from, it may give others the occasion also to be grateful for life and to be reminded that God is with them, that God loves them, that God is present, that God's provision is there for them.
And as we end, in this day and age, fasting is something some people do for health reasons. Intermittent fasting is kind of all the rage as a kind of diet. Can you talk about the tension about doing something for our own physical health or even vanity, and doing something to focus more on our spiritual life?
Yeah. Well, I guess I'd like to come to people's defense, however you relate to this. I think Jesus has promised us abundant life. That was his promise. He did not say, I promise you abundant spiritual life. He said abundant life. I don't think the word spiritual was in Jesus' vocabulary. I don't think so. Just talking about life. So I think if you relate to this in any way, embrace it and see what comes out of this. I don't know. I just think that God is very generous, and if we are in touch with something, some kind of fasting, I've named any number of ways, and you all will know other ways. For whatever reason, I think it's usable, and that good will come out of it. I think that's some of the generosity. Good will come out of it. So go for it. Go for it.
Brother Curtis, it's been a real treat to have you with us this morning, and reminding us in such a simple and humble and straightforward way what this season is all about. Dean, I wonder if you have anything you wanted to say at the end.
Well, I would just put a little add in. The Society of St. John the Evangelist has a wonderful website. There are meditations, there are all kinds of resources, and I would just commend those to you. Some wonderful preaching is available and worship. And in addition, as COVID subsides, one can even think about making a pilgrimage to the Society of St. John the Evangelist there in Cambridge. They have a beautiful house and are known for their great hospitality and retreats. So when that comes back, I would commend those things.
Thank you. That's so generous of you. Thank you, Bishop Wolf. Thank you, Peter. Great joy and honor to be welcomed into your lives at St. Bart's.
Thank you, Brother Curtis.
So welcome. You're so welcome.
Absolutely wonderful to have you here, and thank you all for watching. A link is in the chat and in the description to the SSJE website that Dean mentioned, and you can also follow them on Facebook and all sorts of other social media. We have a special edition of the forum coming up this Tuesday at a special time, Tuesday at 6 p.m. We're going to be talking about the war in Ukraine and have some scholars here to help us understand the religious dimension of the conflict and how we as Christians can respond. And then next week, we'll be back at Sunday at our normal time with a special guest, Ezra Bookman, who founded a firm called Ritualist, which deals, and he's going to talk about the power of ritual in our modern world. So thank you again, Brother Curtis. Thank you all for being here. And we hope you'll stick around and join us for worship at 11 a.m.
Thank you.
God bless. Bye now.